Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Parapsychology Foundation's Lyceum, course number 201, Ghosts and Hauntings. My name is Lizette Coley, and I'm the Executive Director of Parapsychology Foundation. And on behalf of our Board of Trustees and our President, Mrs. Eileen Coley, we welcome you here today. Parapsychology Foundation, as many of you may know, has been in existence for over 50 years, acting as a clearinghouse for information about parapsychology. And we have been serving over the years two constituencies, academia and the public at large. Parapsychology Foundation has long sought to advance education in parapsychology, and it's very heartwarming that you're here with us today. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you to your two instructors today. You're lucky to have them, as in today's world, lots of people call themselves parapsychologists, but indeed very few have dedicated themselves to the actual study and research involved. Dr. Carlos Alvarado obtained his doctoral degree in psychology and parapsychology from the University of Edinburgh in 1997 and was a research assistant to Dr. Ian Stevenson, who is the leading academician in the study of reincarnation at the Division of Parapsychology at the University of Virginia. He was a visiting scholar at the Institute for Parapsychology, now known as the Rhine Research Center in Durham, North Carolina. He's the president-elect of the Parapsychological Association, having served in that capacity once before, and also serves as the president of the Asociación Iberoamericana de Parapsicología. Carlos is PF's chairman of domestic and international programs, along with the series editor of the Foundation's scholarly monograph series, and the associate editor of our journal, International Journal of Parapsychology. He has conducted research in Puerto Rico, in Scotland, in the States on psychology and features of the out-of-body experience, as well as other psychic phenomena. He's also known for his work as a historian in the field. Nancy Zingrone was a research fellow also and a visiting scholar at the Institute for Parapsychology in Durham. While there, she conducted ESP experimental research and was an organizer and faculty member of the Rhine Center's annual summer study program. She, too, is a past president of the Parapsychological Association and is on the board of directors of both the Parapsychological Association and the Asociación Iberoamericana de Parapsicología. In addition to serving as PF's Director of Publications and as the Executive Editor of PF's International Journal of Parapsychology, she is the Associate Editor of the series Advances in Parapsychological Research. She's presently finishing up her doctoral studies in psychology and parapsychology to be submitted at the University of Edinburgh in mid-2002. So at this point, I'm going to turn you over to their capable hands. Enjoy the course.
Good morning, and thank you all for coming. Our course today is the second, after our basic introduction to parapsychology, this is the second basic course in which we start getting into specific areas of parapsychology. Today we are going to discuss ghosts and hauntings. But before we get into that, I'd like to remind you that you have received some packets with information. Some of the things that you'll get there are bibliographies, suggested readings from our collection here. As you can see, we have a big library. We have close to 10,000 books on all topics related to the paranormal. The bibliographies basically capture some of the what we consider the best sources about hauntings and apparitions or ghosts in general. There is one called Ghost Stories, which gets together a lot of our books on different stories from a variety of countries that we hope will give you a flavor of what a ghost is from the point of view of actual descriptions. So please check the bibliographies. I remind you, everything there we have in the library. We also have some announcements of our publications that we will mention, through the talk, because some of them are relevant to the topic that we're discussing today. Well, what we're going to do today is survey what parapsychology has done in the study of the so-called haunted houses. We're going to get into definitions of what a haunted house is, what a ghost is, what are the basic methods of research, some of the most interesting cases that have been published and discussed in the literature, cases that will give you, I think, an idea of how fascinating these phenomena are. We always have to make a distinction between the real ghost story and the Hollywood ghost. The Hollywood ghost is usually much more exaggerated. Many more things happen in the films that they really happen in real life. But having said that, real life has a lot of fascinating things. In fact, real life doesn't need Hollywood to pique our interest on ghosts, because what is out there in reality is so fascinating, so full of details and human interest that you don't need really to fictionalize the subject matter. And we're going to cover some of the cases that we believe are incredible, just to put it in simple words. But some of them have been very well investigated and they have good evidence in their support. Let me start going back into the 19th century and read you a quote that shows something about popular interest in these matters. This is published in 1867 in the newspaper Boston Globe. This is the Washington correspondent of the paper, and he was writing about the problems of renting a house owned by a lady called Mrs. Surratt. I'm quoting, "In the course of time came a tenant, but not to remain. In less than 6 weeks, the lessee had flown from beneath the roof, forfeited his year's rental, and was ready to swear with chattering teeth that his nervous system was shattered for a lifetime. Others succeeded to the occupancy of the house he had vacated, in turn to make a shuddering exit. Mrs. Surratt's house is haunted. There can be no reasonable doubt upon the subject." So here we have the Boston Globe basically certifying, haunted houses exist, and they're very difficult to rent because people are afraid. I mention this because it shows how these cases have been for a long time, and of course even before 1867, in the popular culture. Today you find in newspapers and in a lot of TV documentaries that most of you have seen, and we're going to see some of that later at the end of the talk. There are still discussions of things like that. Why a place cannot be rented because supposedly it's haunted, or why people leave places in the middle of the rent period, with losing money. They're willing just to leave and lose everything they invested because they are afraid of things that are happening in a particular place. But before we get more into details of haunted houses and ghosts, we need to put this in a little context, which will be very simple, and that is, what we're talking is about the field of parapsychology. Parapsychology being the scientific study of psychic phenomena of different types. We talk about extrasensory perception, when we receive knowledge by way other than the senses, dreams about the future, picking up people's thoughts. That's what we call ESP. Psychokinesis is another topic of study, the so-called power of the mind over matter. People that are able to move objects, or people that are able to heal other individuals just by praying, sending good thoughts to them, or by the laying on of hands. That will fall under the topic of psychokinesis. Then there are people that say they remember previous lives, people that leave their bodies and have out-of-body experiences. Again, there are many, many phenomena that parapsychology studies. Today we're going to focus on ghosts and hauntings. So what we're talking is a very specific part of the field of parapsychology that is generally consists on field studies, that is going out into the real world and interviewing people and finding out what's happening. But later on we're going to get more into the methods of research, the theories, and as I said before, we're going to have a few videos that will show some actual investigations, and including some phenomena that have been captured on film. So very interesting appearances. Let me start showing you a few transparencies to illustrate what we mean by a ghost or an apparition in a general way. An apparition is a term used in parapsychology meaning a visual impression, although it can include other sensory modalities other than vision. A visual impression of someone. So you see a figure of a person just in front of you. That's simply what the term apparition means in parapsychology. When we talk about a ghost, which is a particular type of apparition, we are referring to an apparition that is seen regularly in a specific place and that represents someone that has died. But apparitions are much wider than just the study of ghosts. You can have different types of apparitions of the dead. Someone that just died a week ago may appear to you. That's not a haunting necessarily, or not a ghost in the classical sense. It's just a one-time apparition. In many cases on record like that, there are people like Lou Legrand, which is a grief counselor that is currently writing a lot of books about the topic of people that receive visitations by their loved parents or their family members. They just come to visit, they see them, but they see them only once, maybe twice. That's not a haunting. A haunting is something that is more recurrent, something that happens more over time. But that's a type of apparition. You also have apparitions of living persons. A classic case is when someone sees the figure of a brother or a friend that is having a crisis at a distance. But I mean that person at a distance just had an accident. It was in a car crash, and you are seated here, and all of a sudden you see his form right here in front of the screen, looking at you. Like you run to where you think the person is, and you find that they're alive and well. They have survived the accident. That's an apparition of a living person. Again, that's to show how complex the whole topic of apparitions is. When we talk about a ghost or a haunting apparition, we are referring to an apparition, most of the time of a person that has died, that is seen in a place over and over again. So it's only one out of many apparitions that parapsychology studies. And of course, the situation gets even complicated even more when you get into the issue of religious type apparitions. People see the Virgin Mary. Some people say they see Jesus Christ. People see apparitions of animals, even apparitions of objects. There are cases, many of them from the old days, from the 19th century, where people see apparitions of a carriage, even with horses, that just come through a road. So as you can see, when you get into the cases, the phenomenology of this phenomena is really complicated and really varied. And I mention all of this just to make you aware that the ghost or haunting apparition is just one type of apparition inside a really big category. They, of course, are most probably related in terms of mechanism, but that's a different matter. Today we are going to focus mainly on the ghost phenomenon. I want to show you a few transparencies so that you can see what I mean mainly by a ghost. This is of course a drawing of a very old case. This is a Greek philosopher, Arthenodorus, who rented a house, and he was just going to be in his house writing a book, and he found that the house was haunted by this spirit that appears there that was in chains and was bothering him and would not let him finish, writing his book. This person lived around the 7th century AD, and it's one of these unlucky or lucky, depending on your perspective, tenants that gets into a house not knowing that there was a presence there that appeared regularly. In the next one, we move here into the 17th century to a castle, the castle of Burundi in France. And this is basically trying to capture the belief that in certain time periods in some places, in this case in this French castle, there are a group of ghosts that are around the place and can be seen going around and around the castle at specific times. There were certain times of the year, people will say, or the legend will say, that these things were seen more often. But again, that will be another example of a haunting. Certain types of visions that are seen in the same place over and over again. Of course, a lot of these cases, we don't know how much truth there is. Some of them are really old, but they still, I think, represent what is being reported right now. So I don't find them really that incredible. There are similar reports happening right now and that you can see on TV all the time when you get documentaries about ghosts and apparitions. Next one, please. This is another 17th century case. Here we have two magicians, Edward Kelly and John Dee, which are very famous in the history of magic in England. And they were basically trying to contact, they summoned a spirit, that is the figure that you see there, by certain magical procedures or the practice of necromancy. And the spirit appears there, and they pose a lot of different questions, trying to get information about the future and many other events. Again, they believe that not only do these apparitions or ghosts exist, but it also chronicles the belief that you can call for them, that they will come. There are certain procedures, magical procedures in this case, that can be used to control to some extent this phenomenon. Next one. This is the last one I'm going to show now, and this is the 18th century. This is in the bedchamber of a nobleman. He was a lord, and he had an affair with this woman, the story goes, and when he used her, got tired of her, basically rejected her. The woman kills herself. She felt so bad about the whole thing, and then this starts happening soon after she died. She starts appearing and waking him up. He's terrorized all the time, and maybe paying for his sins. That's, I don't know, that would be the interpretation. But you see, again, the whole idea of how the spirit of someone dead is believed to be able to come back and ask or tell you did something wrong, you had to pay for it, you had to repent. And there are many cases like this recorded all through the times. So we have gone basically from the 7th century to the 18th. And certainly there are many other cases. But I think this gives an idea of what we mean by a ghost or a haunting apparition, which is something that keeps coming to you all the time. You can turn it off. If we were going to define a haunting, the so-called haunted house, we would have to say that the basic characteristic or the most important defining thing is the location. What we have is in a particular place, things happen over and over again. And the things that happen are varied. There are visions, there are sounds, there are all kinds of fascinating things. But the important thing is that they are located in a place, in a house, in a room of a house, or it can be also outside of a house. There are cases of roads that are haunted. People that are walking see the same ghost over and over again in the same location. That's what characterizes a haunting. We have to make a difference between the classic haunting or haunted house and the so-called poltergeist. A poltergeist is a German word that means noisy spirit. Poltergeist usually centers not on a place, it tends in general to center on a person. So you get phenomena like movement of objects, things that move around, or sounds in the walls, or other things like that are related to one individual. Sometimes when that person is not in the house, nothing happens. On occasion, when that person is in a different place, things follow that person and happen in a different location. That's different from the haunting, in which the phenomena tend to happen in a location. So you have the experience only if you're in that room, or only if you're walking in that road. Because there are always exceptions, and the distinction between poltergeist and haunting sometimes is not very clear. Sometimes it's really intertwined. Very mixed cases are on record that you cannot tell if it depends on a person, if it depends on a location, on a place. But in general, there is this distinction. That means that in a haunted house, a lot of people over the years, if it's a long case, can come into this place and have experiences, which is again one of the interesting things and the things that in a way make hauntings of interest to researchers, that you can basically keep coming and you always have the possibility of experiencing something or having someone in your team or in your group to have an experience that then you can systematically study. Of course, having said that, it's not as easy as that. Many times when you go there to research or to see things, you don't see anything, and seeing or experiencing depends on many factors, including, of course, your sensibility and how psychic you may be. But we will get into that when we talk more about explanations for this phenomena. Why, some people see more of these things than others, and the like. But again, if we get another transparency, I can show you a few more details on what the phenomena that characterize hauntings are all about. This is from a study conducted by Alan Gold, a British psychologist and parapsychologist. He basically went through a lot of the historical literature from the very early days, the first few centuries where cases have been recorded, to about the 1970s. And he did a very big catalog of cases. He had 500 cases. And of those, there were like 172 that were hauntings, that were basically center places. He read hundreds of these cases and basically coded them and got out all the features of this phenomenon. And it's fascinating reading his things because he puts all that information into the computer, and he did a lot of fascinating analysis. But these are some of the more simple, which shows us on the top some of the most frequent phenomena over a long period of years and with many cases. And more at the bottom, the last four, the less frequent. So we get the noises, imitative and other types of noises, 92%. That's an extremely frequent phenomenon. And by noises, it means all kinds of bumps into doors, the sound of say like someone is walking on a corridor that they have a big dress and the dress is kind of touching the wall. You hear sounds like that, or like sounds of things opening and closing, all kinds of things of that sort. Raps is another type of noise, which basically means a blow or something like this. In some cases, the raps can communicate with people and the case becomes even more interesting. But there are many that just raps all around, blows on the walls, on doors, on chairs, tables, and you don't know what's happening because right there in front of you are having these blows, these sounds, and you cannot see anyone doing the sound and you cannot find a normal explanation. Phantasms are what we call here apparitions. If I can have the next one, and we're going to return to the previous one. This is the depiction of a classic haunting apparition once again. This is what Gold meant as phantasms, a figure that is recognized most of the time as being human, goes by, and most of the time you cannot tell a difference between that ghost and a human being because they look exactly the same. In most of the cases, you know that there is something different when the figure disappears, vanishes in front of you, or goes through a wall, or goes and sits in a chair and all of a sudden it's no longer there. Or in some cases, you have a feeling, something that is very difficult to describe, but you really have to read people's descriptions to see what they mean. They feel that what they're seeing is not normal. And even if it looks like a person, they still feel that there is something different. They feel almost like an energy, an inner feeling that lets them know this is not normal. There is something strange, eerie. Some of them even get, pimples, not pimples, goosebumps in their arms. And it's a physiological reaction that they get. Similar to what animals seem to experience. The dogs and cats, when they see this type of phenomena, especially ghosts, their hair, stands up and they get really frightened. They usually run out of the room in most cases. So this is an example of what Gold means as phantasms. We can go back. But there are many others like voices, groans and whistles. He has here 47%. Movement of objects. In haunted houses, some people believe that physical phenomena don't happen in the haunted houses, and they're really not true. There are many cases of haunted houses in where either small or large objects are moved or are affected in one way or another. You will also find very interesting accounts in which supposedly something physical happened, but in reality it didn't. For example, people hear a big noise in the kitchen, but the noise is so bad that you think there goes the kitchen. Every single thing broke. It must be there on the floor, in pieces. And when you go in there, nothing happened. Everything is intact. Everything is in good shape. But you have that type of phenomenon. Or you see sometimes that something is moved, and when you go back, the thing really did not move. But those are a minority of cases. Still, they seem to happen and show that the haunting seems to be a very interesting mix in which sometimes you get actual physical phenomena in which the chair really moves, and you find the chair in a different location. So something moved the chair. But in other occasions, it seems that something physical happened, and it seemed to have been only some type of hallucination or some type of vision. And that's a puzzle that has never been completely solved, and that we will get a little more into that when we try to explain the cases. There are different theoretical explanations that try to handle some of these very interesting features of the hauntings. In the less frequent, we find things like offensive smells, which Gold describe like smells of food gone bad or excrement, things of that sort. Water phenomena, misty figures. There are all kinds of different things. I'm only showing this to you so that you get an idea of some of the most frequent and less frequent. But certainly, these are not the only things that happen in haunting. You literally can have hundreds of different incidents, and the same things happen over and over again all the time. So again, it's one of the defining features of a haunting. What happens is not only a one or twice occasion, it is something that is happening repeatedly and is experienced by a lot of different people. In hauntings, there are different types of ways in which people can perceive this phenomena. When they say that they see a ghost, most of the time a person is alone and they see something coming out, and they see by themselves. There is no one to share the experience with, except later on when you are telling the tale to a friend or a family member. But one very interesting feature of these cases is what we call collective perceptions. And that is that in some cases, and we're going to get to some of those examples later, more than one person at the same time see the ghost or see something else that is there to be seen. So you are sitting in different parts of a living room, a figure comes in through the door, and the people that are seated there, in some cases, all of them see the apparition or the ghost. But then the opposite also happens. There are cases which in exactly the same situation, only one person in the room will see the figure, and no one else does. So the person says, don't you see that lady that is just walking there? And no one else can see the thing happening. Again, this is another fascinating feature of the cases. On occasion, the ability of people to see it changes. The people that see it all the time, all of a sudden stop seeing it, and someone else in the house starts having the experience. The best cases to study all these type of changes are the really long cases, because you have a lot of time to really go into it, a lot of opportunity for different people to come in, so you get a lot of variety of the phenomenology of this experience, of the features of haunting. If the haunting is very short, it's really very hard to document a lot of these things. But again, we will very soon get into some of the cases that I think will illustrate, and I will read you some quotes from the literature of actual descriptions of people that saw these things and experienced them. In the next transparency, what we have is a summary, again from the Gold collection, this British psychologist, of some of the cases he has in his catalog. There's the place, the date, and the phenomena, and they go from the 15th century to the more recent 1970s, the 20th century. As you can see, the cases vary in that some cases are more complex and others are more simple. We get this one, for example, this one here where it says wraps and hands in, the second case there. And that's a more simple case in that there are only two main phenomena. Wraps, sounds that people will hear, and hands seen mean apparitions of hands. So people will be standing there and on top of a table, they will see a hand, or will see a floating hand someplace in the house. You have two phenomena, which is very different to the next case going down, which you have objects that are thrown, wraps, noises, voices, apparitions of people. Small animals means apparitions of small animals, which is another variety of apparitions that you see sometimes in these cases. Bed clothes disturbed. Oppression in bed means that you are lying in bed and you feel like kind of something kind of pushing you down, almost like a physical sensation Sometimes it's more like a sensation in your chest area. Doors opening and windows get open. This is a very complex case. You have a lot of different phenomena clustering together. So when something is moving, there is an apparition, there is a smell, there are many things happening, either more or less at the same time or at different time periods. So remember, the haunting goes sometimes for a long time. And that's very different from a simple case. These cases vary a lot. They're complex, they're simple cases. We don't know why some of them are more complex than others, but certainly they are very different. There are also cases that seem to show more intention. There are some cases that people describe, this feels to me to be malignant and malevolent, because they feel senses of presence, of evil in the house, and they describe it as a sensation. They feel it in their body, and they say that they know that this thing doesn't have any good intentions towards the house or towards you. On the other hand, there are other cases where people say the opposite. We feel very good in this house. We know we have a ghost, but it's so nice, it's so pleasant. We're having a great time with this spirit here. And again, you have a big variety of cases here, complete different reactions. Obviously, the people that are having bad experiences are the ones that want to end the haunting. And those are the people that when they call ghost hunters or parapsychologists or mediums or other people to help them, what they really want is to get rid of the ghost. They want all these phenomena to stop. You don't see that attitude in the people that have more positive type of experiences. They're happy to have the ghost, they feel it's part of the family, and some of them give it a pet name. Uncle Bob. They say, oh, that's Uncle Bob that is rattling, the chairs or doing something in the attic. And it's taken almost as a joke, although seriously at the same time. Again, this is because there are no bad feelings in the manifestations. They feel secure, they don't feel threatened. And believe me, these cases can really be a big problem for a family. If you go and you visit people that are having these experiences, when they get something that is really bothering them, they are nervous all the time, they really don't know what's happening, they are really afraid. If they have children, they are of course really worried for the children because they don't know if the children will be harmed or what's going to happen. Very few cases you find examples of bodily harm. The type of things that you see in films where a kitchen knife, gets out and comes flying from far away and whoop, gets you right there or gets someone. I don't know really of any well-investigated cases that have things like that. Certainly there are cases where people have been harmed. Stones are thrown, objects being moved and all that. But what I'm trying to say is that the type of haunting that you see in movies, or like in the movies like Poltergeist, where people were killed or really harmed, those cases are very rarely seen by investigators. I'm not saying that there is no harm in some of them, but Hollywood sometimes gives the idea that all of these hauntings are malignant and that all people are being killed and harmed all the time. And that's not the case when you see the real cases that are out there. Let us get into some of the real cases. And I would like to start with one case that is really a classic from the 19th century. It's a case that was active between 1882 to about 1889. And the main phenomena is that what you are seeing there. An apparition of a lady whose face was very rarely seen because she was always covering with a handkerchief. What we have here is a family. At the time of publication in 1892, the report is published in this book, this journal. This is the original. We have here in our library a lot of the original periodicals of psychical research and spiritualism published in the 19th century and even before. And this is the proceedings of the Society for Psychical Research, so-called SPR, that you will find in a lot of the parapsychology books. The Society for Psychical Research is considered to have started organized parapsychology. And this is the 1892 issue, has an article by a person called R.C. Morton. And it was called Record of a Haunted House. R.C. Morton was a young woman that now we knew later on to be, her real name was Rosina Despard. And she was studying to be a physician. which at that time was not so common, especially this happens in England. There were very few women studying medicine, and even less those are really qualified. Soon after this case ends, she passes all the qualification and exams and she becomes a physician. But it's important to mention that because this shows that this young woman, which is the author and the main investigator of this case, had a very analytical mind and also being very open. She had no problem with the ghosts. She really wanted to study and do something about it, other than just telling a ghost story. She gets in contact with Frederick Myers, one of the big early psychical researchers in this society, and Myers basically starts collecting these the accounts of what happened. The phenomena consists of this lady being seen by this Miss Morton and members of her family. But the way these things were seen were fascinating, and the things they tried to do with the apparition really almost have no precedent. Let me read you from the original report the first account that Miss Despard recorded. This was in March of 1882. He says, I had gone up to my room, but was not yet in bed, when I heard someone at the door. And I went to it, thinking it might be my mother. On opening the door, I saw no one, but on going a few steps along the passage, I saw the figure of a tall lady, dressed in black, standing at the head of the stairs. After a few moments, she descended the stairs, and I followed for a short distance, feeling curious what it could be. Then the candle that she was holding, just was off, and there was no light around, so she had to come back. But she said the figure was of a tall lady dressed in black, of a soft woolen material. The face was hidden in a handkerchief held in the right hand. Something very similar to this drawing that is done years later. I saw the upper part of the left side of the forehead and a little of the hair above. But that was almost as far as she could see. She could never see the face. It was always covered with the handkerchief. Later on, she records a lot of experiences, her own, some of her sisters, other people, servants that live in the house. It was kind of a big house with several servants, and a lot of different people saw this. Let me read you another one. The first time I spoke to her was on the 29th January 1884. I opened the drawing room door softly and went in, standing just by it. She came in past me and walked to the sofa and stood still there. So I went up to her and asked her if I could help her. She moved, and I thought she was going to speak, but she only gave a slight gasp and moved towards the door. Just by the door, I spoke to her again, but she seemed as if she were quite unable to speak. She walked into the hall. Then by the side door, she seemed to disappear as before. Basically, she saw this figure many times, and almost all the times, the thing will vanish. But she tried to do a lot of interesting things, and that's what makes this case unique. On one hand, the uniqueness is you have this figure coming and going through the house at different times, in daylight, at night. A lot of people see it, but then Miss Morton, or Miss Despard, Despard was the real name, tries to do all kinds of things. Let me tell you some of the things that she did. Basically, she tried to follow her. Went around her all the time, was never able to get extremely close. Tried to touch her many times, because one of the things she wanted to answer was, is this thing that I'm seeing solid material, something that has matter, or if it's something that doesn't have any consistency? She was never able to touch the figure. She would sometimes corner the figure in corners of the corridors in the house, and the figure will vanish, will just disappear. And there were other times that it was interesting, this has been mentioned in other cases, that she was kind of close to reach the figure, but the figure was always elusive. She could not approach in any way that she could really touch it or get too close. If she approached over here, the figure automatically was over here. it was almost like if there was one of those magnetic repulsion things that you approach something and the thing automatically, the closer you get, the farther the thing is. She described this kind of thing, that there was no possibility of getting even close to it. And that was very frustrating, but she could not control the experience. She tried to photograph it. When she was talking with Frederick Myers, this famous psychical researcher of the old days, one of the things that Myers asked her is, do you think you can take a picture? And she had a tripod and put a camera, from those days, and made a few attempts to take pictures, but she was never successful. In those days, the cameras require a long time exposure, and the figure was really not cooperating. She was not standing there waiting for the picture to happen. The figure would just come and go, and the technology really did not help, but at least the attempt was there. Again, she tried to engage in conversation, as I said before, and the figure never spoke. On one occasion, she said that the figure kind of made kind of a sound, like a gasp, or something like that, but that was as far as it came. Most of the time, the figure didn't acknowledge her presence. But on occasion, she would kind of look directly at her, so it came and went the attention the figure had on her. One of the most interesting things she did is that, trying to see if the figure was material or not, she devised a very interesting test. And that is, she got pieces of very thin thread, and she put a glue at the end, at the point of the threads, on one corner and on the other, and she basically glued the thread across the steps of the staircase. So the idea was, anything that comes down or up should break the threads. And she put 2 or 3 at different heights, and she said, if you come from certain angles, she explored everything with candlelight. You see it from here, you cannot see it from there. Anyhow, she had the opportunity, when this figure appeared again, she was appearing frequently, to see the figure actually going through the threads without disturbing them. She said the threads did not break, the threads did not even move. So obviously, at least at that moment, she had no consistency at all, or it was so tenuous that she just could not interact with the fibers of the thread. And this is very interesting, because it's very, very few occasions in the history of haunting research that you have simple but very direct tests like that will tell you something useful about the apparition. But as I said before, that apparitions sometimes are seen by some people and not by others, this also happened a lot in this case. There were occasions when they were all sitting in the living room reading, as they would do in those days, before TV, radio, people will read a lot, all in the family together. And in one occasion, Miss Despard, sees the figure coming into the living room, and no one else in the family that was present saw it. Her father, which he came to believe that the thing existed because he trusted his daughter and other of his daughters that were seeing it also, he was never able to see it at all. And on that occasion, he, as much as he tried, and he even walked to the place where he was being told that the apparition was standing, he could not see anything, and the other sisters could not see anything. So we see Miss Despard basically describing to them, the figure is not here, he's moving across the room, he's doing this, he's doing that, and none of them could see anything. But on other occasions, some of the other sisters, together with Miss Despard, will see it, or they will see it in different places. There was even some occasions where some of them, 2 or 3 together, will be following the apparitions, because they were going after the apparition all the time, running and trying to corner it and touch it. But the apparition will disappear, and they said, oh, it disappeared. It left. And they will hear from the other side of the house, one of the servants, I'm seeing it right now, she's out in the garden. And they will run there, but very rarely all of them will see it together. By the time they will get there, it was no longer there. But what is interesting is that from a group of people seeing it in point A, disappears here, and in point B out there, another member of the household will report seeing it. So the thing was moving all over the house, and people in different locations were seeing it. Not exactly at the same moment, but consistent enough that it suggests that the thing moved from one place to another, and it was seen by people that were there in the proper perspective to perceive this thing. Sometimes it was seen in plain daylight in the garden, and she had specific spots where she will stand. No one was ever sure who this lady was. All the research and a lot of this was known much later in the 1940s. And remember, this case is from the 1880s. It was only very much later that they found out first the name of all the people involved and the identity of one lady that people said that from the description of the dress, it fitted her description. But they were never sure because no one ever saw the face, and this lady did not die in the house. This lady was the second wife of the owner of the house, and she had some argument with the husband, and she had left, and she died like a year later in a different house, very close by, but not the same house. And this is basically what is called today the Cheltenham haunting, because the phenomena happened in Cheltenham, which is a place in England that still has the tradition. Up to the 20th century, other people have reported similar apparitions, not in the same house, but in neighboring houses. Andrew Mackenzie, which is a British investigator, he went there and tried to interview a lot of people, and he says he thinks that the haunting cannot spread out into the neighborhood because people in close by places said that they saw similar things. The evidence was not extremely strong, but it was very puzzling, and I think enough to show that something really strange was happening in that neighborhood. But nothing ever happened again as interesting and as detailed as this thing in the 1880s. It's a case that even today I would say is fairly unique. I'm not saying that there are no cases like that around. There are probably others, but what is unique about this is that it was recorded, and it was properly recorded, with all the details, the name of the people, the times, and all that, and that's what makes this so fascinating. But again, this is a classic example of a haunting apparition. If we move to the next transparency, we see another case. This one is from the 20th century, the 1970s in Spain. It's a place called Belmes de la Moraleda. That's a small town in Spain that had a very interesting phenomenon happening in a humble house in the middle of the town. An old town, a lot of stone houses. The kitchen floor of that house will show faces like this. All of a sudden, one face like that appears, and many others started appearing, but they appear only in that location. If this case is genuine, and a lot of people believe it is, this is a case of haunting, but you don't have a ghost or apparition walking around like we saw before. What you have are faces that are coming from the stone. A lot of people try to investigate this, went into the place, they got plexiglass, and they basically drill holes on the stone and put screws around and put the plexiglass on top of the faces and try to seal the surroundings so that if there was someone that was trying to paint the faces, just to simulate a phenomena, so that they would not be able to do it. And they claim that they were never able really to find any evidence for fraud, that the faces even change under the plexiglass. It's a fascinating case. The problem that it has is that it was never investigated very systematically because it created so much of an uproar. It became so sensational that it became a real field day. Everyone in the town will come and see it, people from outside. It became almost like a tourist attraction, and the conditions were never good enough to do good controlled scientific studies. So even to this day, there is also, people believe it's real. It's very hard to evaluate because it was never studied very systematically. We should stop now. We have to change our tape, and also I think it's a good time to take a few questions that you may have up to now. Okay, well, I'm going to continue now describing a few other cases. Some of them I remind you at the end of the lecture where you will see on video. We have 4 videos, some of which are very interesting case investigations. But now I'm going to let Nancy Zingrone continue the part of the lecture that discusses specific cases. She's going to discuss 2 or 3 more recent cases that have been investigated by researchers, some of which we are acquainted with. Nancy will talk about a very interesting haunting in a hotel in England called the Bell Hotel. And we'll also talk to you about interesting cases that happen in the south of the United States, especially in areas related to the Civil War. So Nancy, please.
We're in the process of publishing a book by Tony Cornell called Investigating the Paranormal. And Tony Cornell is, he's a veteran ghost researcher from England. He's sort of got a foot in both camps, because we're going to be talking about the amateur ghost hunters and ghost enthusiasts who are doing their work outside of the bounds of scientific parapsychology, and then the scientific parapsychology field investigators and psychical researchers. And Tony Cornell, in a sense, has a foot in both camps. He's a businessman from Cambridge, but since the early 1950s, he's been actively investigating ghost hauntings, poltergeists, and mediumship in the UK and the US. If you watch all these wonderful shows on television, he's been on Real Ghost Hunters, he's been on Discovery, he's been on just about everything. And later today, we'll take a look at one of the tapes of the Bell Hotel, and for the people who are buying our tape, we'll describe that video. The Bell Hotel, if I can have the first, was founded in 1493 in Thetford in Norfolkshire in England. Since 1493, and it's the white building there on the opposite side of the graveyard, the Bell Hotel has been used since 1493 as an inn and a public house, a restaurant and pub, continuously since those days. In March of 1991, a gentleman named Colin Mitchell and his wife went to the Bell Hotel for their weekend honeymoon, and got their key, went up to room 10 on the second floor, and room 10 is the second window from the right end of the White House as it's facing you. So it's not the corner window, but the next window in to room 10. And almost immediately started to have their experiences. They experienced a big drop in temperature in front of the door to room 10. They had a great deal of difficulty getting the key to go into the lock and getting the lock to turn and getting the door open. Once they were inside, they didn't notice anything. They went down to the hotel for dinner, had spent some time in the bars, people tend to do in England, and up they came in the evening to go to bed. When they were, after they had fallen asleep, they began to experience waking up because of footsteps in the hallway outside of the door, and footsteps that seemed to kind of take a turn at a right angle at the end of their room and cross the room from the hallway side to the window side. There were temperature changes in the room. The temperature changes were not only temperature drops, but also rises. There were situations where they were opening the windows because it was hot and the radiators were off, closing the windows, turning the radiators up full blasting, not able to get the cold out of the room. They also saw a light on the wall. They were very adventurous because none of this, they discussed leaving the hotel, but it was their honeymoon and they decided to stay, so they went to sleep. Around 3 in the morning, Colin woke up, sort of startled awake, and saw a young girl standing at the end of the bed in what looked like a white nightgown with a little band of flowers on her hair, and she was staring at him, holding onto the poster at the end of the bed. It was a 4-poster bed. And then she turned away and walked to the window and disappeared. So he woke his wife up. His wife had not heard or seen anything, and back to sleep he goes. A little bit later in the early morning, he's woken again with the covers being pulled up towards his face. Falls asleep nervously a little while later, wakes up again before dawn, and now there's somebody tucking in the sheets underneath his body on his side of the bed, but he can't see anybody there. In the morning, when they woke up on the 9th, they had in this room, and you'll see it later in the video, a very nice fireplace that had a mural that had been painted over a century ago, and the hotel had put a plexiglass cover over this mural to protect the mural. And they saw a glow in the corner of this cover of the mural, and when they went to take a look at it, it was like someone had streaked finger marks on the inside surface of the glass of this protective glass. And they were pretty sure they hadn't seen that the night before because they'd been fascinated by the mural. So they went downstairs and they had their breakfast and they had a conversation with the manager of the hotel, who said, "Oh, sorry, we forgot to tell you, but room 10 is haunted. And in fact, we have trouble keeping guests in room 9. And if you would like to have a different room in the hotel, or if you'd like us to book you a room in another hotel in Thetford, we'd be more than happy to do it. And they decided, well, gee, this is kind of adventurous, and we'll try another day. So during the day, they went back to the room to get dressed for dinner after spending a day doing touristy things around the Thetford area. And they noticed that during the day, there were odd shadows in a corner by the wardrobe, and the television cord was moving up and down, causing the picture to flicker. They also had some problems with temperatures while they were getting ready to go to dinner. When they came back upstairs in the evening and went to sleep, they heard footsteps again inside and outside of the room, but they didn't see an apparition, and they had problems again with the temperature, with it rising rather than there being cold spots. On the next night, I guess it would have been Saturday night then, so the second night they were there, Colin again was woken at 3 in the morning, and this time the girl was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at him. When she stood up, he felt the bed rise by his feet, walked around the edge of the bed, and she walked over to the window and again disappeared. Couldn't get his wife up. Didn't have any of the other problems with the sheets or any of that, but again they were hearing footsteps outside the room and along the corridor. On Sunday, they went down again and talked to the manager, and the manager said, "Oh, I have something to show you." Can I have the next transparency? So the manager took the Mitchells, Colin and his wife, down to a corridor at the back of the hotel and showed them this portrait. And Colin became visibly shaken and said, "Boy, that's an older version of the apparition I saw. The apparition is like the same face, but maybe 30 years younger." And the manager told them, "Well, this is Elizabeth Radcliffe, who was an owner of the hotel from the late 1790s to the early 19th century. And she had a daughter named Betty. And the story goes that she was having an affair with Betty was having an affair with an ostler who worked on the property, and or was in love with this person, and threw herself off a balcony that was connected to the room at the time. The room had been quite a bit smaller in the 18th century, and the area outside their doorway and then along the bottom length of the bedroom had been a gallery that led out to a balcony. So these were areas, the areas in which they were hearing footsteps were areas in which people would have walked in the 18th and 19th centuries. They decided to stay, even though now they had a name for the ghost, and they went back to the room on the Sunday night. This time they saw glowing handprints, like a child's handprints on the inside of this glass. And later on, they saw another handprint. They found first one on the left side and then later on the right side. And they were inspecting this glass fairly frequently. They asked the manager, had the glass been taken down recently? Who would have held it to put it back up? Has it been cleaned on the inside? They tried to find out for themselves kinds of ways that this would have happened. Well, in April, after they left the hotel, they got in touch with a local museum, and as happens frequently in haunting cases, the local museum had a slightly different tale to tell. Oh yes, it was the ghost of Betty Radcliffe, her daughter, but the deal was that Elizabeth Radcliffe, the owner of the hotel, had been having the affair, that the ostler had killed her, and that she was buried in St. Peter's churchyard, which you saw outside the hotel in the first transparency, and that the daughter had thrown herself from the balcony in despair over her mother's death. So the Mitchells decided this was not something that they felt competent to investigate, so what they did was they got in touch with the SPR in April of 1991, and Tony Cornell was the person who took on the case. He did a site investigation, checked over the mural cover, interviewed the staff. He could see handprints visible on the inside of the glass. The staff were reporting experiences going in to make up the room in room 10, and there being a depression in the bed, going into room 10 and finding it cold or hot in a season when it shouldn't have been that. People in room 9 leaving because they felt that there was something going on. So it was obvious, and then the manager reported that when Mitchell saw the picture, he was visibly taken aback, and then he felt fairly sure that Mitchell was making a real recognition. Well, Tony did what SPR investigators normally do. In addition to taking all of this information, he also took an instrument pack, did a overnight site visit, and then went back with a couple of film crews over the years in between 1991 and today to do extra investigations, and we'll see some of that later on and talk about it when we get to the section on instrumentation. Many did what psychical research investigators also do, which is to start looking into the tales that were being told in the neighborhood. Why did the hotel staff have a different story from the museum staff? There were local history guidebooks that had yet another story. They were able to find out that Elizabeth Radcliffe had indeed bought the hotel. She was a widow at the time. She bought it in 1793. I don't know what age her daughter was. They weren't able to find that out at the point that she bought it. She was not murdered. She lived to be a very old lady and died in 1826 or 36, somewhere in there. There was no evidence in any of the local newspapers that there had ever been a murder committed in the hotel. There had been a murder of a drunk sometime in the 19th century who was a man outside the hotel in the street by the hotel. But no, there was no evidence of anybody ever having died there, and certainly not Elizabeth Radcliffe and her daughter. In addition, Elizabeth Radcliffe was not buried in St. Peter's churchyard, but in the churchyard of a church in another village. So Tony's conclusion, and you can read about this in his book, was that while he felt very certain that this was a very interesting case, and he had a very good impression of Colin Mitchell, he told the story the same way every time he told it. There were a lot of details of things that happened during the day that his wife corroborated. Things that he talked about fit in with other people's experiences. So Tony was fairly sure that the Mitchells had experienced what they reported to the SPR. But in terms of being able to actually document any of the elements of the tale other than pointing towards Elizabeth Radcliffe and her daughter, he was unable to do that. This haunting, and Tony has investigated more than 800 cases. You hear these numbers thrown around when you see ghost hunters on television, and they'll say, well, I've been at it 20 years, I've done 450 cases, 600 cases, 700 cases. Most of the cases that people get turn out not to be a haunting. They turn out not to have anything to do with it. Boy, that's an older version of the apparition I saw. The apparition is like the same face, but maybe 30 years younger. And the manager told them, well, this is Elizabeth Radcliffe, who was an owner of the hotel from the late 1790s to the early 19th century. And she had a daughter named Betty. And the story goes that she was having an affair Betty was having an affair with an ostler who worked on the property, and or was in love with this person, and threw herself off a balcony that was connected to the room at the time. The room had been quite a bit smaller in the 18th century, and the area outside their doorway and then along the bottom length of the bedroom had been a gallery that led out to a balcony. So these were areas, the areas in which they were hearing footsteps were areas in which people would have walked in the 18th and 19th centuries. They decided to stay, even though now they had a name for the ghost, and they went back to the room on the Sunday night. This time they saw glowing handprints, like a child's handprints on the inside of this glass. And later on, they saw another handprint. They found first one on the left side and then later on the right side. And they were inspecting this glass fairly frequently. They asked the manager, had the glass been taken down recently? Who would have held it to put it back up? Has it been cleaned on the inside? They tried to find out for themselves kinds of ways that this would have happened. Well, in April, after they left the hotel, they got in touch with a local museum, and as happens frequently in haunting cases, the local museum had a slightly different tale to tell. Oh yes, it was the ghost of Betty Radcliffe, her daughter, but the deal was that Elizabeth Radcliffe, the owner of the hotel, had been having the affair, that the ostler had killed her, and that she was buried in St. Peter's churchyard, which you saw outside the hotel in the first transparency, and that the daughter had thrown herself from the balcony in despair over her mother's death. So the Mitchells decided this was not something that they felt competent to investigate, so what they did was they got in touch with the SPR in April of 1991, and Tony Cornell was the person who took on the case. He did a site investigation, checked over the mural cover, interviewed the staff. He could see handprints visible on the inside of the glass. The staff were reporting experiences going in to make up the room in room 10, and there being a depression in the bed, going into room 10 and finding it cold or hot in a season when it shouldn't have been that. People in room 9 leaving because they felt that there was something going on. So it was obvious, and then the manager reported that when Mitchell saw the picture, he was visibly taken aback, and then he felt fairly sure that Mitchell was making a real recognition. Well, Tony did what SPR investigators normally do. In addition to taking all of this information, he also took an instrument pack, did a overnight site visit, and then went back with a couple of film crews over the years in between 1991 and today to do extra investigations, and we'll see some of that later on and talk about it when we get to the section on instrumentation. Many did what psychical research investigators also do, which is to start looking into the tales that were being told in the neighborhood. Why did the hotel staff have a different story from the museum staff? There were local history guidebooks that had yet another story. They were able to find out that Elizabeth Radcliffe had indeed bought the hotel. She was a widow at the time. She bought it in 1793. I don't know what age her daughter was. They weren't able to find that out at the point that she bought it. She was not murdered. She lived to be a very old lady and died in 1826 or 36, somewhere in there. There was no evidence in any of the local newspapers that there had ever been a murder committed in the hotel. There had been a murder of a drunk sometime in the 19th century who was a man outside the hotel in the street by the hotel. But no, there was no evidence of anybody ever having died there, and certainly not Elizabeth Radcliffe and her daughter. In addition, Elizabeth Radcliffe was not buried in St. Peter's churchyard, but in the churchyard of a church in another village. So Tony's conclusion, and you can read about this in his book, was that while he felt very certain that this was a very interesting case, and he had a very good impression of Colin Mitchell, he told the story the same way every time he told it. There were a lot of details of things that happened during the day that his wife corroborated, things that he talked about fit in with other people's experiences. So Tony was fairly sure that the Mitchells had experienced what they reported to the SPR. But in terms of being able to actually document any of the elements of the tale other than pointing towards Elizabeth Radcliffe and her daughter, he was unable to do that. This haunting, and Tony has investigated more than 800 cases. You hear these numbers thrown around when you see ghost hunters on television, and they'll say, well, I've been in it 20 years, I've done 450 cases, 600 cases, 700 cases. Most of the cases that people get turn out not to be a haunting. They turn out not to have anything to do with the paranormal. So maybe 1% or 2% of all these large numbers of cases are things that even the investigators are feeling very confident about. But still, it gives you an idea of how frequently these experiences are reported. One of the things that Tony was noticing that this was a particularly active haunting, and it was active in the sense that these people were willing to stay several days and see what happened. It had some typical things that you see in a lot of hauntings: the footsteps, problems with the bedclothes. Frequently people will have their bedclothes kind of pulled off the end. You know, you get a lot of this in modern cases and in the old cases, where someone will wake up and it's like somebody standing at the bottom bunching the quilt and just pulling it off. There are other cases where people have reported an apparition coming along and tucking you in, making the bed on top of you, or making sure you're okay in there. Lots of apparitions who stare and walk away. Lots of experiences, including a case in Tony's own personal experience, where the apparition rises and the bed rises. You feel the bed rises if a pressure has come off. Temperatures changes, normally cold changes. Lots of first-time experiencers, and then this notion that these legends grow up, and the legends may or may not have anything to do with what actually happened in the house. What was unusual about this case was this light and shadow phenomenon in the daytime, and the flickering of the television with the cord visibly moving and no one there, and the handprints inside of the glass, for which nobody could come with a good conventional explanation. The hands were altogether too small to have been somebody that would have lifted the glass for cleaning, and that had been done a couple of years before, and they knew who had done it and that they were workmen, and this was not what happened. We'll talk more about the Bell Hotel case later. Tony has a lot of cases like this. In this case, he did take a Japanese medium with him at the behest of a Japanese film company at one point, Mrs. Gibo. And in this case, she wasn't able to pick up anything. But in another case we'll talk about a little later she was able to get quite a bit of information. So Tony will use his instrumentation pack. He will use a group of site investigators, and he will use psychics or sensitives to help him in his investigations. Now, just to show you the differences, the other thing I'm going to talk about is Gettysburg. The International Ghost Hunters Society, if you get on the web, I did a review of their website in the first issue of our journal, is one of these umbrella organizations that local regional groups of ghost hunters and ghost enthusiasts belong to. It's a very interesting site. The people who run this site, and you'll see Dave Ost in one of the films that we show later, the people who run this site do it, it's a religious thing. They're very much believers in the supernatural and in survival particularly. They talk about their ghost hunting and the photographing as a kind of ministry. They really want people to understand that there is life after death, and that's their purpose. But having said that, that doesn't take away from the fact that they're also concerned about how the people that work with them do their investigations. So you see courses for site investigations. You see they have a CD-ROM that you can use to kind of take a look at your photographs and see if you have artifactual images on your photographs or if they might be paranormal. We'll talk about that more later. And every year they hold, so they're not, what I'm saying here is that they're definitely not unaware of investigative procedures, and the regional ghost societies that exist around the country, we'll talk about those more in depth later, they range from high school kids who go out on the weekend to sit in the cemetery with their video camera and their Ouija board, to groups of retired EMS, police, and firemen who are trying to do a serious investigation from the point of view of their previous training, to people that are connected to scientific parapsychology. And there's a lot of good work that's being done out there. And it's not a bad way to spend a weekend. The International Ghost Hunters Society runs their annual conferences every year in Gettysburg. Gettysburg, they say in their advertising, and it's got to be close to true, is one of the most haunted places in the United States. There are so many ghost tales coming from Gettysburg. And there are even, when you get to Gettysburg, there are a number of people in town who've written guidebooks and compilations of stories. There are videos, reenactments of some of these experiences. Charles Emmons, who's a faculty member at Gettysburg College, has done a book and published articles. We have some things in the library in Gettysburg. But the ghosts that have been reported at Gettysburg are very interesting because they kind of cover the gamut, and they give you an idea of how active things are. They have collected tales from tourists. They have collected tales from people who lived through the battle and were on the battlefield and had experiences on the battlefield. There are people who lived in the town and had experiences beginning after the battle was over. They have people who are not connected to ghost hunter societies but have just come to Gettysburg for vacation and have an experience that seems to have been of an apparition or a haunting. There are lots of photographs and videos and lots of impressive anomalies, some videos that are not so anomalous and some photos that are not so anomalous, but some that are not quite sure what to do about that. One of the typical hauntings, and this is a type of haunting that you actually hear from battlefield adapters all over the place, from England to the US and elsewhere, that tourists will come and be wandering around the battlefield and they'll see a column of soldiers going up the hill with their guns. And they'll assume, well, the enactors are here, and go back to the tourist center and say, oh, that was really great. Where are the enactors going to be this afternoon? And there's nobody on the battlefield that day. I had a student in a class when I taught a Ghosts and Hauntings class at the Natural History Museum, the Film Museum in Chicago, who told the class that when she was a child, she lived near Concord, Massachusetts, and she and a girlfriend were playing in the woods along one of the main roads that led into town and saw a column of British soldiers walk by and assumed, oh, this is great, there's going to be an enactment in town. And off they ran to the center of town to see this mock battle that was going to take place, and there were no enactors anywhere. So sometimes people see these things happen, and then it's when they try to figure out who is it that they saw that they realize they couldn't have seen anybody, and then they come to realize that they may have had a haunting or seen a haunting. There are noises of the battles. There are a lot of people from houses that surround Gettysburg Battlefield who will report hearing gunshots and crying and screaming, the sounds of horses. There have been people who have reported driving up the little pathway that goes through the battlefield and having to stop because a man on a horse is going by, and the man on the horse gets across the road and disappears. There are people who are in the town of Gettysburg who live there or who are visiting who will see soldiers in Civil War dress sitting around, walking around, and don't notice that there's something unusual until the person disappears. And then Charles Emmons tells a story that's a repeated experience of undergraduates at Gettysburg College, which is to walk up to one of the administration buildings and see a sentry marching back and forth on the cupola on the top of the building. But there's no sentry there now. There was one during the battle. Some of the atypical hauntings, one comes from the battlefield itself during the course of the battle. One young man who survived the battle reported being pinned down in a particular location and being helped from that location to a place of safety by an American Indian in full war dress. And his interpretation of his experience was because a very heavy American Indian battle had taken place on that ground 100 or 200 years before, that he was actually helped to safety from the battle he was in by someone who remained from the battle that had taken place before. There's one very interesting one in one of the guidebooks of a family inside of Gettysburg in town who are having a party, family party. Somebody looks out the window and sees a ghost, sees a Civil War soldier sitting on the ground in front of a tree in their yard. And over the course of 15 minutes, 3 or 4 or 5 members of this family go to the window and watch this guy. And over the course of 15 minutes, he fades away. That's an atypical one. There is one wonderful tale, and it's probably apocryphal because it's too good to be true, and we didn't go back to the museum to ask them if they actually had this bullet. But there's a tale that comes from reenactors on a day that they were reenacting the Gettysburg battle. A group of the reenactors were sitting on a hillside overlooking one of the deep trenches that had had a lot of action. And it was a foggy day, the fog was rolling in, and a guy walked up out of the fog and sat down and talked to them. And they thought he was just so, he had to be a method actor because he was dirty and he was grungy and he had this wonderful accent and his teeth were kind of falling out, and he kept asking them questions about the battle and they couldn't get him to talk about who he was and where he came from. And he asked them if they had enough ammunition. And one of them said, oh no, I didn't bring anything, and he gave this guy a mini ball. And the tale is that the guy gave the mini ball to the museum because this man went back down out of the fog, into the fog, and disappeared. And when the mini ball was taken to the museum, it was made in the proper way, not like the kinds of things that they gave the enactors. And the enactors came to believe that someone had come out of the battle to sit and talk to them. Whether that happened, we don't know. Another kind of case that is frequently put in under hauntings, which feels when you read it as if someone has basically turned a corner and walked into the past. So sometimes these are categorized as retrocognitive experiences, precognition being knowledge of the future, retrocognition being knowledge of the past. But more frequently you will see them put in with a collection of haunting cases. Charles Emmons collected a case from 2 administrators from Gettysburg College who were working late one night in the building and decided to leave together. Got into the elevator, pushed the button for lobby, and instead it took them down to the basement level. When the elevator opened at the basement level, they were overcome with the sights and the smells and the sounds. It was as if they had opened up onto a battlefield surgical unit. There were dead people, dying people everywhere, surgeons amputating legs and arms, people crying, the smell of blood, the smell of what was going on there in this horrible noise. And the 2 of them stood transfixed for a few seconds with the elevator door open until one of the surgeons turned around and looked at them. And then they flew at the buttons and tried to get the doors to close, and up they went. Emmons says that they didn't quit their jobs immediately, but they did quit their jobs within a year of their experience. This type of experiences, and in investigating the building, the basement area had been used as a surgical field unit during the battle. These types of experiences are very vivid and very forceful. We have a number of them here. Probably the most famous is the Adventures at the Trianon, which is about 2 English ladies who were walking around the grounds of Versailles and seemed to have been transported into the era of Marie Antoinette. So it's possible that these types of experiences shouldn't be categorized in with hauntings, but it's also possible that some other kinds of less dramatic experiences people have that are classified as hauntings could also be this kind of turning a corner and finding yourself actually front to front with the past, face to face with the past. There are a lot of other battlefield hauntings reported around the world. There's a lot of other reenactment experiences. Tony recounts 2 in his book that are particularly strong. One is from a 17th century, I think, memoir of the reenactment of a battle from the English Civil War, which took place repeatedly over several days and was seen by several hundred people, complete with sounds and noises, and people being recognizable, some of whom hadn't died in the battle, but were living elsewhere. So what exactly was that? He puts it in the book primarily because it kind of asks more questions than it answers. Another one was the Battle of Nectansmere, and this is a battle that took place, I think, in 10th or 11th century Scotland. We have the original report here in the journals, and then Tony does a good job of describing it again, in which a woman is driving up a lonely, dark road in Scotland and finds herself in an area where on the hillside is this battle taking place, and she sees the clothing, she sees the weapons, she sees people moving around, and is able to give a description that's very accurate in its details for what is known about that battle. So there are a lot of different kinds of cases that are from the 19th century, the 18th century, and before that are still being reported today. And that's just to give you an idea of the differences. Carlos is now going to talk a little bit about the approaches that people take to the study of hauntings, and then I'll be back after that on mediumship. So I'm going to give you back the podium.
The book that Nancy was mentioning, authored by Tony Cornell, is a book called Investigating the Paranormal. This is a book that we are publishing very soon. It's a fascinating book. You have some publicity material in your packets. It's basically a whole lifetime of investigations with mediums, hauntings, ghosts. It's fascinating because the book gets together the real and the fraud. You know, we have to recognize that in psychic phenomena and haunting and everything else in life, there is a lot of things that are fraudulent. People just wanted to make publicity, money. And this book is good because it brings that type of cases where he found normal explanations, fraudulent explanations, together with the cases that he believes are real, he couldn't explain, and basically puts it together and shows how difficult a lot of these investigations are. Because some of those fraudulent cases, get a lot of publicity. A lot of people believe there is nothing real, and then years of work go down the drain because people get skeptical of the fraud. But again, that's a problem that we have in all the areas of psychic phenomena. That there is always a simulation of the phenomena, but that doesn't mean that the real thing doesn't exist. And that's something that the skeptics, we always are arguing with the skeptics. That one thing doesn't mean that the other doesn't exist. But that book presents a very good perspective of what happens out there, and I would highly recommend it. We will let you know when the thing is published. It should be coming out really soon. Anyhow, we have been talking about the investigations of Tony Cornell and the Cheltenham ghosts and all these things, but what I would like to do now is just delineate, give you an outline of what are the methods of research, how do people go out gathering knowledge about hauntings. Obviously, hauntings are the type of thing that you cannot take out of their context, and bring into a laboratory. That's basically impossible to do. You have to go to the place, or you have to depend on the testimony of people. So here we're dealing with a lot of the methods that the social sciences have developed to gather information from events that either have happened in the past or are happening right now. We have a lot of what we call single case studies, which are cases, one case being investigated in great detail, which you do by interviewing people or by going to the place and living there, which then we will call a field investigation. In the case of the Cheltenham ghost that I was discussing, that's the case with the lady with the handkerchief on her face. That's a very good example of a study of one case in great detail, because you get all the aspects of the case being investigated: who was there, what type of apparition was seen, or what were the different effects that were experienced by the different people, who failed to see the apparition and who was able to see it all the time. But you also have in that particular case the element of being in the actual place. A lot of the haunting cases that you see reported are investigated by people that just come from the outside to visit the house where things happen. That's very different of when you are living in the place where the events happen. In the Cheltenham Ghost, the advantage was that those people were living there, so they just had to get out of bed and just see the ghosts going all around. They had a lot of opportunities to study the phenomena. And they had the scientific frame of mind of being very practical and writing things down. That kind of case report is extremely rare. You are lucky if you have a good case report in which people come from outside and visit the house. Many of the times they're not allowed to stay in the house because the people live there. They don't want their house invaded. It's very hard, really, to get to gather, what happened. So you depend on what they allow you for you to see directly. But most of the details of the case come from interviews. You have to depend on people that tell you, I saw the ghost. So you have to interview the person, gather all that information. You rarely see the ghost yourself. It's very, very rare that a psychical researcher going to one of these cases is able to see something moving around or seeing the ghost or perceiving the phenomena directly. It has happened. And you will find, say, Tony Cornell is one example that, he has so many years of experience that he was able to find a few things that he experienced directly. But in most of the cases, you have to depend on testimony. So that means that you have to gather that testimony in a very careful way and really being sure of the information. Basically, you are collecting the information, you try to find out if several people say the same thing. Similar to a police investigation, you want to know if there are contradictions in the testimony, if this person corroborates the other, if they say, we saw the apparition all at the same time and we all saw it was the same thing. You have to talk with the people independently to see if that really happened. If at that particular moment, they both saw the phenomena and they saw it in the same way. Because we know from other cases that there are many instances when one person sees something and another doesn't see anything. So it's very important by testimony to really capture the truth, behind all these narratives. Because that's what we're getting, pure narratives that basically need to be evaluated. And then, of course, by your interaction with people, as we do in everyday life, you form a judgment if you can trust the person, if you cannot trust it, what type of observation is better than the other. It's basic human observation and interview techniques. But it becomes particularly hard in instances in which this incredible or supposedly incredible phenomena happen, because there is a lot of emotional content when you talk with a lot of these people. You have to remember that if you go to investigate one of these cases, you may go with a lot of curiosity. You really find this stuff fascinating. But when you're talking with the people that live there, many times they have a whole different perspective. They're very frightened by their thing, or they see it in a very solemn and religious point of view in which they don't want the thing to be disturbed. And you have to respect that. There are certain cases you just cannot come in and do whatever you want. You have to go in and first you adapt to what people there believe, what they want to do, and then you do the best scientific study you can. But many times the place is not ready to go and just do science. You have to do other things. You have just to let people talk, share their experiences, because that is what they need. It's very important for people to share sometimes with outsiders what the family has been experiencing. Or the opposite. Keep it secret because it's considered something extremely intimate. So you find a lot of the things like that in these cases. And of course, if they don't cooperate, the people that live there, it's almost impossible to put a case on record. And I think that happens a lot to a lot of the ghost hunters that sometimes are allowed to come in and take records, but the family doesn't want the information to go out. And that's a problem, from the scientific point of view, because then we don't have information. And the way we learn about these cases is like the numbers I have been presenting here. If the cases are not published, are not put out, we learn nothing about them. So there is that problem, how to gather information without offending people and be respectful of their beliefs. But I think in many cases a good balance can happen, and the families cooperate, are interested in the thing going out. You change many times the names of people so as to protect them. Because remember, you publish something like that in New York on Broadway Avenue there is a haunted apartment, and next day the National Enquirer will be there with cameras, everyone will be there. they will not be able to get out of their apartment and they will lose all their privacy and it will become really problematic in their lives. And that's part of the thing we have to understand, that we have to also to protect the rights of the people that are being investigated. But I think we can find a good balance that in general gives us the information that we need. Living in a haunted house has happened on a few occasions that it has allowed for some very interesting studies to happen. The Cheltenham case being one. There was a case in a house called Ballykin House, also reported in England, in which the people, being of financial means, they had money, they were able to rent the house and basically move a team of investigators there for a whole year. This is a 19th century case, and stay there and study the case. And there is a book that is called The Haunting of B House. B standing for Ballykin. For many years, they didn't reveal the address, the location, for the reasons I mentioned before. But it's a unique case again because you get a whole book that they published in 1899 with later editions in which they lived there and they basically were keeping a diary of a haunted house. One of the main things they reported was the apparition of a nun that was seen in particular parts of the house and sometimes even outside of the house. Again, this is another way of investigating things, being able to have almost complete control of the environment in the sense that only your people are there, people are going to make the observations, and you have no outside interference. Very rare, I don't know of any other occasion that it has been done, at least in terms of a fully published report, because we hear of a lot of cases done in recent times like that, but the problem is that you never get to see a report, so you don't know what happened. But you see these things in TV documentaries. There is another way of studying this phenomena that combines the figure of a medium, or sometimes a psychic. As you know, the figure of a medium comes out from the movement of spiritualism. It's a movement that starts here in the United States in the middle of the 19th century. And it's a movement that basically one of the main tenets is, you survive bodily death. After you die, your spirit survives, and it is possible to communicate with people that have died. That communication happens through people called mediums. There are different types of mediums, but in general, there are people that have abilities to channel, to bring information from these people that have already died. What has been done in the past is that when you have a haunted house, you try to bring a medium to work with you. Why? Because it is believed, and by experience, a lot of people have found that to be true, the medium can perceive things that many of us that are not developed in that way do not perceive. So you have a house in which certain apparitions have been experienced, other phenomena have happened, and you come in with a team of people and you ask your medium, in some of these research reports, to go through the house and tell you, what do I feel and where do I feel? There have been studies that have shown that these persons can be very accurate in detecting the areas where phenomena have been reported. Sometimes they also give you other information. They also tell you it is the ghost of a man or a woman or a child, and this person needs, and then they give you a story. This person killed themselves, many years ago. They basically need to resolve this problem. They give you all kinds of things, and then what the researcher does is, you gather all that information and you try to see if you can corroborate it, because it's very important to find corroboration. By that I mean that if you are being told by the medium or any other sensitive person that there was someone there of a certain description, you have to find evidence that was the case. There was a child there that died of pneumonia in the early part of the century. In some of the best investigated cases, you find corroboration with things like that. In other cases, it's harder because sometimes the records just do not exist. But you try to find out from hearsay, from neighbors, from death certificates, anything that is a record needs to be checked to find that out. So that's one part of the use of mediums. The other part is which is very interesting, is the whole idea of what some people call cleaning the house, or basically stopping the manifestation. And this is something that has been done since the old days. I found in one of our spiritualist journals upstairs, the spiritualist newspaper, in 1877. There's a very interesting paper of a group of people that take a medium into a place that is haunted, and the whole idea is to see if the medium can communicate with what they believe are spirits that are haunting the place, and see if the spirits can be helped. Most of the people that go there, they say, we cannot talk to the spirit, so we need someone that has that ability, and if that then can happen, perhaps we can change the situation or bringing a stop to the phenomena. And what a lot of people have been doing is basically using the medium as a way to have a dialogue with these supposed spirit entities. So you identify first who's there, and then it's more than one. Why are you there? What do you need? What happened that kept you in this place? And what the researchers try to do is, once they have all the story, and this can take a while, sometimes it's not very easy. The communications are not easy coming, sometimes they come in fragments, sometimes the communication is not very friendly, and the information is not easily forthcoming. So, it's not easy. But with patience, and you go there over and over again until you have the whole picture, and then the whole idea is of talking to this spirit and trying to say, what can we do to help? What do you need? What happened there? In some cases, and that you find a lot in the spiritualist literature, you find things like the spirit saying through the medium. The medium is writing or talking, or just saying, I see the spirit there and he's telling me something. The message that comes is, I'm not, why are you here? This is my house. I'm not aware that I died. Why are you telling me that I died 50 years ago? And then that's when spiritualism is part of a particular type of therapy, which is trying to convince that supposed spirit that he should not be there, that he's dead. First, to recognize you are dead, you need to move on, you need really to stop the manifestations. And once that is accomplished, in many of these cases, the manifestations stop. And that, of course, brings credence to the idea that we are dealing with real spirits, that is really the cause of the phenomena. But that's one or another way of investigating, and at the same time doing something to help people. And if you believe that this is a spirit, you are also trying to help the spirit. It is very difficult to do because you need the help of people with abilities, mediums with good abilities, that are willing to go put a lot of their time to do this kind of investigations. And as I said before, it's extremely time consuming. A lot of the communications are not very clear. So you need to go back and forth, and deal with the situation, sometimes for a period of several months. But it is a very important approach, and one that I think is kind of neglected a lot because it assumes the existence of spirits. A lot of investigators that come from other scientific fields don't want to assume that, and sometimes there is a problem there. But you can deal with these things even if you're a skeptic about the existence of spirits. The whole idea being, if this procedure helps us to get information first, or to help the people that are in the house, why not try? Why not use it? And then you find people that use it with those qualifications and say, we're not spiritualists, we are not convinced it's a spirit, but since this has shown to be successful on previous occasions, you can get rid of the ghost, let's give it a try. And again, things sometimes are not so easy. It takes a long time, sometimes it doesn't work so clearly. Other people just use other types of exorcism. They bring priests, or they have different traditions that have rituals to get rid of unwanted entities. There are many, many ways of dealing with it. But I think one of the most effective is dealing with a medium, and it gives you also information. But we have again to mention the importance that whatever comes through those channels, it is very important to try to verify what is happening. Some of the information can be confused, sometimes it can be completely wrong. There can be all kinds of problems. The last thing I wanted to mention, and then later Nancy is going to discuss a few of the other techniques, is what we call informal experiment. And that means once you're in a place that there is a haunted house, what else can you do other than talking to people and collecting information? And by informal experiments, I mean things like they did at the Cheltenham ghost investigation, which was trying to test for ideas. She put threads at the foot of the staircase to see if this thing is material or not. That's a very simple experiment. The figure went through it. Okay, she reaches a conclusion that this thing is not a normal body. It can go through matter. But then there are many other things that people do now. They have all kinds of instrumentation. Nancy will talk later about that, in which they try to take pictures, they try to measure the ambient energy in the houses to see if there are electromagnetic fields associated with the occurrence of haunting phenomena. Whatever you do, the whole idea is to use the case and much more than just get a description. You are actively trying to get something from the phenomena using all kinds of instruments. And that's another very interesting way that we are going to see in more detail when I show you the videos at the end, because a lot of the current ghost hunters, that's exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to go in with all kinds of instrumentation to do scientific records. And they live with data in their tapes, the magnetic tapes, the videotapes, all kinds of other detectors have physical data that then later they can analyze. They can quantify, or they can put it in graphs or show it on a screen. There are many things I can do with that later, but the whole idea is let's try to do some type of measurement that will tell us more about what is happening in a haunted house. This will conclude now this section. In the next section, Nancy will be talking about some specific cases. We're going to leave that for after the break, but just to give you a short summary, she's going to summarize two cases, one of which mediums were used, so that you have a more concrete example of how these things work in practice. So we are going to end the morning now on this topic. And after lunch, we are going to come back and continue mainly with the modern research and the instrumentation that is being used to try to see their physical components of haunted houses. Thanks.
Hi there, my name is Lisette Coley and I serve as president of Parapsychology Foundation. I want to welcome you to the Foundation's YouTube channel. There's already a wealth of information available posted, and we have plans to continue to post our classic lectures and new materials, so you don't want to miss out. So hit that bell, please subscribe, and you'll be notified. And hope you enjoy.